This is the Commonwealh Club of California. Find us on the internet at www.commonwealthclub.org. I'm Ann Clark, a member of the Commonwealh Club and chair of the Environment and Natural Resources Member-Led Forum. Our program tonight is the Redwoods League and 21st-Century Land Conservation. With Sam Hodder, who's president and CEO of Save the Redwoods League, and Justin Faggioli, who's director of Save the Redwoods League. Please welcome Sam Hodder and Justin Faggioli to the Commonwealh Club.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you for the Commonwealth Club for hosting this evening's event. It's a pleasure to be here. Good evening, I'm Justin Faggioli. I'm chair of the board of directors of Save the Redwoods League. Thank you, the audience, for being here tonight to learn from Sam Hodder about the landscape for 21st century land conservation in general, and more particularly about the conservation of California's redwoods, both coastal redwoods and sequoia, and including the need for expanded protection of the redwood landscape, the need to restore redwood landscapes to what they once were, and the need to expand the connection between urban populations and these magnificent forests. But first, for those of you who don't know him yet, let me give you a little bit about Sam's background. Sam didn't grow up among the redwoods. He grew up in the East Coast, playing in the woods back there. Sam built trails with the Appalachian Mountain Club in college. He graduated from Princeton and began his career with the Trust for Public Lands. Sam then moved to California with the Trust for Public Lands heading its California operations. Sam, his wife Kendra, and their 4 sons spend most of their spare time outdoors exploring East Bay parks near their home or in farther afield. The League is extremely fortunate that Sam joined us 2 years ago as president and CEO. The League is truly benefiting from Sam's years of conservation experience, his visionary strategic thinking, and his contagious enthusiasm. He spreads the elixir of the redwoods and conservation far and wide. Sam is at the helm of the Redwoods League at an exciting juncture of the future of redwood forests and their conservation. Tonight, Sam's comments are even more apropos because Save the Redwoods League will mark its centennial in 2018. Building upon its history, and as you will hear from Sam, we are thinking deeply about our work in the next 100 years. It is fitting we're having this conversation here in California's Bay Area. California is one of the crucibles of conservation movement. It has seen the founding of our country's first national parks, organizations like Save the Redwoods League and the Sierra Club, and the California State Park System. Thank you for being here tonight and for participating in the advancement of our collective understanding of California redwoods, where we are today, what lies ahead, and what we must accomplish in the future. After Sam has completed his remarks, there'll be time for questions. Please welcome Sam Hodder.
Thanks, Justin, and thanks everybody for coming. Hello, everybody. My name's Sam Hodder. I'm president and CEO of Save the Redwoods League, and for the sake of truth in advertising, I'm going to be talking about redwoods today. I'll share a little bit about the science, about why the redwoods are so uniquely impressive, a little bit of history about how the redwoods inspired the land ethic of the 20th century, and then a little bit of both together as I describe how today, as in generations past, the redwoods are at the fulcrum of the conservation movement. And while I think I speak for many of us here that we'd rather be having this conversation outside in the redwoods, it wasn't going to happen. Had to be here inside. So we're going to have to settle for some beautiful pictures, a few stories, and our best effort to channel the patience and the forgiveness that the redwoods inspire. So, in order to understand where we are and what lies ahead, we should take a quick look back. The redwood fossil records date back to the Jurassic period, 200 million years ago. These trees are really, really old. By 65 million years ago, the redwood forest flourished throughout the entire northern hemisphere. Fossils have been found everywhere from Alaska to Pennsylvania and across Asia and Europe. Small wonder that one of our founders was one of the world's leading paleontologists of his time. His name was John C. Merriam, and just last week, actually, I met with his grandson in Washington, D.C., and he remembered Merriam telling him as a kid that redwoods were the original face of nature. I love that image, the original face of nature, and one of the oldest living things known to man. The redwoods have seen the world evolve and have survived through global change across the millennia, constrained by those changes but still thriving for millions of years in a narrow band of prehistoric forest just 450 miles long along the California coast and into southern Oregon. Fast forward to 1849, when millions of years of stability turned on a dime. As a reference point, the population in San Francisco in 1848 was about 1,000 people. In 1849, the next year, it was 25,000 people. By 1870, barely 20 years after gold was discovered, 265,000 people lived in the Bay Area, and the city of San Francisco was a full-fledged city, and a city built almost entirely of redwood. While as a global ecosystem, the redwood forest is relatively small. It was about 2 million acres, about 10% smaller than Yellowstone National Park is today. But in 1848, it must have seemed huge. And land was cheap. Timber companies found an eager, willing seller in the federal government who wanted to accelerate the settlement of California. And thanks to the Timber and Stone Act of 1878, redwood land was sold by the federal government at $2.50 an acre. And the timber value at the time was about 500 times that. And within just a few years, for the first time ever, the redwood forest was privately owned and began to quickly disappear. Within a lifetime, just 75 years later, we cut down almost half of the coast redwood forest and about a third of the giant sequoia trees. Another 50 years, and only about 5% of the old growth remained, standing in scattered groves protected by Save the Redwoods League and our partners. The redwood forest went from over 2 million acres down to around 120,000 acres in a matter of a few generations. It's worth remembering that in 1849, when the timber harvesting began, the concept of land conservation didn't exist. Manifest destiny was all the rage. The wilderness was there for the taming. Henry David Thoreau was just 32 and had not yet gone to the woods to live deliberately. And the Hudson Valley School of Landscape Painting had not yet begun to depict the romantic landscapes of the West and inspire an appreciation of nature. Nature was still seen as a challenge to be tamed, an economic gain to be harnessed. But in 1864, inspired by the giant sequoia of the Mariposa Grove near Yosemite, near Yosemite Valley and in what's now Yosemite Park, President Lincoln took the first great step of land conservation. Just a few years after the giant sequoia trees of Mariposa Grove had first been discovered, and in the middle of the Civil War, Lincoln set aside as publicly protected land the Mariposa Grove of the giant sequoia. And for the first time in our history, the land was designated as wild and natural for public enjoyment. This was a watershed moment in the development of an American land ethic, and the giant sequoia were right there at the starting line. And even to this day, the National Park Service logo is dominated by a giant sequoia tree. Over the next decades, the public's response to the redwoods continued to evolve. John Muir's passionate advocacy and creation of the Sierra Club in 1892 was largely inspired by his spiritual appreciation of the redwoods, both coastal and Sierra. A few years later, the Semper Virens Fund was founded in 1900 to save the redwoods of Big Basin. And in 1905, Congressman William Kent acquired a grove of ancient redwoods in Marin County and donated the land as a federal park to be called Muir Woods. With his love of the redwoods front of mind, Kent was the lead sponsor in the 1916 legislation to create the National Park Service. And he went on to be an active supporter and friend of Save the Redwoods League. But despite several early successes, the pace of devastation of the redwood forest continued to accelerate, many miles to the north and out of sight and out of mind of the rapidly growing San Francisco population. And then in late 1917, 3 naturalists and civic leaders planned a road trip up the newly completed 101 highway, the Redwood Highway as it was called, to take a look. They were overwhelmed with the beauty that they found and shocked by the devastation of the forest. Before they made it back to town, they had hatched their plan to establish Save the Redwoods League. So a little more information about who these guys were. One of them was Madison Grant. And Madison Grant was a New York attorney who was a close friend of Teddy Roosevelt and helped him to found the Boone and Crockett Club. Another was Henry Fairfield Osborne. He was the president of the American Museum of Natural History in New York and a friend and travel companion of John Muir. And then John C. Merriam, who I mentioned earlier, the dean of the faculty at Cal Berkeley, one of the leading paleontologists in the world at the time. He was president of the Carnegie Institution for Science, one of the largest scientific institutions in the world. He helped to develop the education programs of the National Park Service and was the chair of the League's board for our first 25 years. Upon their return from their historic road trip, they were joined by Stephen Mather, who was the father of the National Park Service. And fresh from founding the National Park Service just the year before, Mather saw a direct link between the fate of the Redwoods and the burgeoning national movement to save our iconic places. Stephen Mather was a founding board member of Save the Redwoods League. So the League's founders were national leaders in science and education. They were pioneers in an evolving culture, exploring a new relationship between the public and our most iconic landscapes. Inspired by the global significance of the redwoods and their rapid devastation, they gave voice to a growing appreciation for both the scientific and the spiritual value of the country's natural beauty. The redwoods grew to be emblematic of the American landscape, and their devastation served as a clarion call for the conservation of our most special places. Our founders tapped into a growing national sense that wilderness had more to offer than the single purpose of private economic gain, that the value of the redwood trees went beyond their value as timber or as vineyard stakes. Their philosophy elevated both science and human inspiration as compelling values of natural lands, and worked to save the redwoods for the intrinsic value of the forest itself and because of the psychological, emotional, and spiritual value of a simple walk in the woods. The belief that the Redwood Parks make our lives better. They make our communities stronger. They believed in parks as classrooms, that the research in the wilderness of our parks would prove critical to our understanding of the natural world. And most importantly, they created and perfected the tools of the conservation movement. Remember, this was 1918. There was no such thing as a land trust movement. Environmentalism didn't exist. Rachel Carson had not yet written The Silent Spring. There was no conservation playbook to follow. These guys, they had no rules. They had to write their own rules as they went. And they created the tools for conservation not just of the redwoods, but for the larger conservation movement of the 20th century. For example, and to get just a little wonky for a minute, they pioneered the model of a nonprofit entity negotiating land deals for public benefit, then conveying special places into public agencies for parks. Remember that most of the parks of the day had been designated, not purchased, on land already owned by the federal government. This new model was about acquiring land back from private owners for the creation of parks. And even as they were negotiating land deals with the timber companies that were actively logging the redwood forest, they initiated and led the legislative process to create the California State Park system into which they would convey these special places. Then, with the generous support and strategic thinking of J.D. Rockefeller, they pioneered a model of matching public and private funds. To inspire private philanthropy, they led the effort in California to pass the very first conservation bond to match private dollars with voter-approved public money. I've been doing conservation around the country for over 20 years now, and this is the playbook that has been in place for decades. It's the way we've collectively saved some of the most special places around the country, and these guys pioneered these tools and put them into practice. In 1928, then the League recruited Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. of the father and son team who designed some of the greatest city park systems of our country. They hired him to conduct a state park plan, a vision for what would become California State Park System. Olmsted was a visionary who, along with his peers at the League, saw parks as elemental to the American society, part of the fabric of modern life that reflected a purely American sense of place. Like schools, churches, and museums, parks were critical and a critical element to a healthy and vibrant society. He believed that it was the American way that our most beautiful landscapes were not just for the landed gentry and the landowning class, but rather that they should be set aside for all of us. The physical manifestation of our right to the pursuit of happiness. Olmsted joined the League's board of directors in 1926, and he stayed on our council for 29 years. And his philosophy has infused our mission ever since. Not surprisingly, Olmsted's California State Park Survey included a backbone of Redwood Parks as core to the California park system, stretching up the California coast. And with the survey, the League led the effort to create the California State Park System, led the legislative and public relations effort to pass that first conservation bond, and got to work buying redwood groves for parks. And so it went for the next 97 years. And looking back today, we have saved over 200 acres of redwoods in parks and reserves. We've helped create a network of 66 local, state, and federal parks. We've brought thousands of young children into the woods through our education program. We've advanced scientific research and enabled millions upon millions of individual moments of inspiration and wonder in the special places that we've helped save together. Today, California has the largest state park system in the country, and the coast redwoods and giant sequoia are the crown jewels. From Big Sur to Northern California to the Sierra in the east, the redwoods draw millions of visitors from around the world every year. California's parks shelter ancient trees, the tallest and most massive living things on Earth, reaching over 370 feet tall. Some giant sequoia are over 3,000 years old, already hundreds of years old, when Homer was drafting his first draft of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And as impressive as they are, the forest is so much more than these ancient trees. There's an amazing, complex community, specially adapted to live and thrive among the old-growth redwoods, adapted to an ecosystem that has been here for millions of years. They shelter incredible biodiversity, much of it high in the canopy, including some species that we've only recently discovered. We're only beginning to learn about this ecosystem and uncover all its mysteries. And I'd like to share a little bit of what we're learning. From the days of our founding, Save the Redwoods League has always been committed to science, but in recent years, we've taken that commitment to a whole new level with the Redwoods and Climate Change Initiative. We have brought world-leading scientists into the canopy of the redwood forest, and we're learning some incredible things. First off, we're learning that old redwood forests don't stop growing. In fact, the older and bigger the tree, the more wood they put on every year. Old-growth redwood forests sequester and store more carbon than any other ecosystem on the planet, by a long shot. Second-place finisher isn't even close. One of our research plots recently measured in Jedediah Smith State Park was found to have the highest above-ground biomass anywhere in the world. That same plot had the most leaf surface area of any forest in the world. One tree was found to put on more than 2,000 pounds of wood in a single year. That's just one tree grew that much. They found whole communities living 300 feet above the ground. They discovered salamanders that we didn't even know existed that spend their entire lives up in the canopy. A community of plants living and thriving, ferns, mosses, huckleberry bushes, all up in the canopy of these trees. They found a whole fully grown Douglas fir tree growing off of the limb 300 feet above the ground. This research is hugely important for our conservation work. And it is helping us to better understand the redwood forest's role as a carbon sink, illuminating their value as a stable habitat refuge as other habitats are shifting and changing, informing our work in restoring younger forests and understanding more of the function of these ancient groves. And it's establishing a baseline against which we can measure the health of the forest as the climate continues to change. And most importantly, it's inspired our education program as we're able to take real-time data out of the canopy and into the science rooms around the state of California, and in turn bring the students into the forest. But of course, the redwoods are about more than species diversity and biomass and carbon sequestration. There's something about the way the redwoods make us feel. How the forest absorbs anxiety and inspires a humble calmness and perspective. We all know that time spent in nature is good for us. We've heard the studies of how time in parks inspires healthy lifestyles and reduces the prevalence of obesity and obesity-related diseases, how a walk in the park reduces anxiety and inspires creativity. But those studies don't fully reflect how the redwoods affect people. There is something more to it. At the League, we get to hear stories from our members every day about the power of these places, and I tell you, it's what keeps us going. I get to hear from the teacher who explains how the student who lashes out in class becomes a leader on the Redwood field trip, or the veterans group who find relief from their symptoms of mental and physical trauma among the ancient trees. The grief counselor whose clients have tried everything, and when nothing else works, she takes her patients to stand among these beautiful trees that have endured thousands of years of storms and fires. The couple who met camping down at Portola Redwood State Park years ago and were married there in the park and now go back every year for their anniversary with their kids in tow. And I have a dozen or so of my own particular stories, of my own moments of joy in the Redwood Forest. So indulge me with just one for a minute. It was the day before I started at Save the Redwoods League. And I'd been working in conservation for many years, but this was a big deal. This was an organization that had been around since 1918, and I needed to get in the right frame of mind. So I went to the Redwoods to get inspired, not surprisingly. I went to Big Basin State Park, and I did the Berry Creek Trail, which is a spectacular trail. If you haven't been out there, I recommend it. It's an 11-mile loop, and I was determined to get into the Redwood frame of mind, to come to this new responsibility and do it justice. And so I was walking through the old growth. I'd passed the waterfalls, which are spectacular, and I was really starting to feel it. I was getting that inspiration. I came up the trail with the old growth all around me, and I started running. I just started running through the woods. And I started to hear these voices up ahead of me. And sure enough, as I got closer and ran up the hill a little bit further, there was this whole group of kids that were out on a field trip. There were probably 30 of them. And they were waiting up at the top of a hill, and when they saw me coming, they kind of spread to the side and formed a gauntlet along the trail. And I kept running right through, and some of them started putting their hands out. And before I know it, all of them are putting their hands out, and I'm getting high fives as I'm running through this group of kids in the Redwoods. And it was perfect. It was like, this is my moment. We can do this. And it was like they were there cheering me on, and I came out of that so inspired and ready to go. It really could not have been better. And that was just one moment. I think about those kids who forever are going to remember their camping trip in the Redwoods and that creepy guy who was running up the trail who wanted to slap them five. Okay, so probably not the best story. It was a great transformational moment for me at the very least. These are the places where life decisions are made, where anxiety finds perspective, and where life finds its balance. People are fundamentally affected by visiting the Redwood Forest. And when you go into the Redwood Grove, you come out a better person. These moments happen again and again, moments of joy, of solace, of renewal, of inspiration. They accumulate along miles of trails, through acres of protected places, and across generations, until our collective spirit is elevated. Even as these forests clean our air and breathe out and in like the lungs of the planet, they are our holy places. And as much as it's our mission to protect and restore these forests for their own global significance, it's our responsibility to connect people to these places. People have to see these forests. Collectively, we need these redwood forest experiences. We need to ensure that these moments of joy, of transformation, become a central part of the American experience. So here we are. Save the Redwoods League has spent the last 97 years delivering its mission to protect and restore the redwood forest and connect people to its peace and beauty. And we've been busy. Together with our partners and with the support of many here today, we have largely saved what remains of the ancient redwood forest. This was a remarkable achievement, and our approaching centennial is a moment of great celebration for Save the Redwoods League, but we're still at the beginning of our story. On the timescale of the redwoods, of course, our 100-year history is a blink of an eye. And looking ahead, we have a lot of reasons to develop new strategies. Because today we're faced with a uniquely modern set of challenges. The world looks very different from how it did 100 years ago. Our parks have suffered from decades of disinvestment. Many of you will remember a few years ago when 70 state parks were going to be closed due to California's fiscal crisis. Well, 17 of those were redwood parks. Our parks have much of the same infrastructure that was built in the 1930s during the Depression, and many of our parks are out of date and deteriorating. And this isn't a problem that's unique to California. Public funding for parks is on decline across the country, and our public spaces are really beginning to show their wear and tear. And the population has grown dramatically in size and cultural diversity, and our parks have not kept pace with that growing and changing demographic. Whole segments of our population don't feel safe or welcome or have any means of even accessing some of the special places that we've helped to save. Nature deficit disorder is actually becoming a real thing. Technology and urbanization is such that this generation is more disconnected from the outside world than any in our history. Childhood obesity is one of the more significant public health challenges of our time. These are the challenges facing the conservation community today. It is a whole new world, and we need to be prepared to innovate. And just as the Redwoods inspired the conservation innovation and steady cultural shift of the 20th century, so today the Redwoods offer models to address the challenges of the coming century. In addition to these larger cultural trends impacting the conservation landscape today, and as we develop the innovations that will help us to navigate them, we know that the redwood forest remains at risk. Despite the Herculean effort, 95% of the ancient redwood forests have been cut down, and in some places 2 or 3 times over. The groves that we have helped to save are spectacular, but we've learned a lot about what they need to survive into the future. Forest ecologists have been telling us for many, many years that to protect the trees, you have to protect the forest. And to protect the forest, you have to look upstream and down. We've learned that coast redwood forests need size and scale to thrive, that watersheds, not groves, make for a vibrant and healthy forest, that islands of old growth are isolated, vulnerable, and directly impacted by the lands that surround them, that to truly conserve the last of the world's ancient redwoods, we need to begin to heal the forests that connect and sustain those groves. That means we have to consider the more than 1 million acres of cut over and actively managed forest lands that surround the remaining ancient groves. The good news is that that million acres that surrounds the groves that we've helped to protect is still redwood forest. It's growing back as we speak. That's another thing that's so amazing about these forests. The redwoods are incredibly resilient, and you don't have to look farther than Oakland to see it. Some of the world's tallest trees used to grow in the Oakland Hills. In fact, sailors used to navigate through the San Francisco Bay by a particular grove of redwood trees growing up above Oakland. But in the late 1800s, they were all cut down, all but 2. There are 2 old-growth trees that remain in the East Bay Hills. But if you go out there today and go out to Joaquin Miller Park in Oakland, which is a park that Save the Redwoods League helped to save in the 1930s, the forest is young. Many of the trees aren't more than 100 years old, but it is an inspiring and beautiful and spectacular place. And there are families from all over the Bay Area that go there to be inspired. And these are the very same trees that we cut down 100 years ago to build San Francisco and the cities of the Bay Area. The very same trees. Different stems are growing up, but it's the same plant that has grown there for millennia. Imagine that redwood resiliency released in the critical areas of that 1 million acre swath of younger managed forests that stretch from here north to the Oregon border. More good news. Many of the landowners in that redwood range, both public and private, both industrial and non-industrial, are ready to explore a different balance for the redwood forest. A balance that replaces our past forest management approach of clear cuts with ecological forest management techniques that embrace the multiple values of the redwood forest. There is momentum among many forest landowners with whom Save the Redwoods League is working to find a different balance that restores the natural functions of our forest and sets the redwood range on a new trajectory. A balance that sustains the health and viability of the redwoods as a vibrant, functioning forest into the future. One such landowner is the Maillard family. The Maillards own a 15,000-acre redwood tract in Mendocino County. At the mountainous headwaters of the Garcia and Navarro rivers, this property has 28 miles of fish-bearing stream and includes about 12,000 acres of redwood and Doug fir forest, including nearly 1,000 acres of old-growth redwood and mixed conifer groves. It is one of the last and largest expanses of old-growth redwood still in private family hands left in the Coast Redwood Range. The family assembled the ranch piece by piece starting in 1925, buying up formerly homesteaded properties and piecing them together. Many of the parcels that they bought had been cut over forest back in the 1800s, and slowly they began healing the forest through progressive, light-touch forest management techniques. This family was doing sustainable forest management 90 years ago, long before it was cool. So today, surrounding the old-growth groves that the Maillards have so carefully protected for more than 90 years is a young redwood forest that is healing under their stewardship. It's growing to reflect old-growth characteristics while generating sufficient annual financial revenue to sustain the ranch. This is the healthiest privately managed forest I've ever seen. And Save the Redwoods League has an option to acquire a conservation easement to make permanent the good stewardship of the Maillard family, and to forever protect the old growth, the undeveloped landscape, and the ecological forestry practices that have brought this redwood forest back. Another example of conservation partners innovating to advance restoration is in the Santa Cruz Mountains. The San Vicente Redwoods property is an 8,500-acre property just above the coastal town of Davenport, north of Santa Cruz. We protected the property last year through an innovative partnership with 3 other conservation organizations, the Peninsula Open Space Trust, Sempervirens Fund, and the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County. The property has been managed by industrial forest as an industrial forest for generations, and is now managed by the partners under a conservation easement held by Save the Redwoods League. Our conservation forestry team designed a forest management plan that sets a different balance for the forest resources and in turn puts the forest on a new trajectory. And that plan is protecting the highest ecological values in reserves, restoring the forest that can be healed to become the old growth of the next generation, allowing for substantial working forest in the highest ecological standards, providing public access through a network of trails, and establishing outposts for research and education. Implementing partnerships on restoration projects like this across the Redwood Range would allow us to protect and restore forests at scale and set the redwoods on a new trajectory that advances a better balance of forest values. This approach is about more than sustainability. Sustainability implies holding ground, maintaining status quo, and preventing further devastation. This approach is about getting back the forest that we've lost. It's about prioritizing a full spectrum of values of the redwood forest, from carbon sequestration, riparian habitat, species diversity, inspirational recreation, even as the property continues to generate local wood supply through appropriate ecological forestry. Through projects like these, we have the ingredients to innovate how we protect and restore the redwood forest, how we deliver our mission to address new and current challenges and opportunities. Even as we strive to protect and restore the redwood forest, we have in our redwood parks the potential to reconnect the public with the beauty of the outdoors. But again, today's world brings new challenges together with new opportunities. Our population has outgrown our parks. When the system was first designed, there were 5 million people in California. They're now close to 40 million, with a level of cultural diversity that we never imagined when the parks were established. As a result, net park visitation is up, crowding our most popular parks beyond their capacity, and per capita visitation is down, meaning that a lower percentage of us are experiencing the inspiration of these special places. Whole segments of our population don't feel safe or have any sense of ownership of our parks. Nearly an entire generation has missed out on the experience of standing at the foot of a redwood tree as a result of the proliferation of technology and the dominance of organized sports, over-programmed and over-structured time for our kids. Given the stresses that we are under, we need our parks more than ever, but our parks aren't ready. We have to bring our parks to a level of excellence for the Californians who need them, and the Redwood Parks can and should lead the way. We have to elevate our shared commitment to our parks and invest in systematically upgrading the quality of the visitor experience. I promise you, even if it were not my job to be biased, I would tell you that the Redwoods are the place to start. that the Redwoods are a gateway to a broader appreciation and a deeper connection with the outdoors. And if we start with the Redwood Parks, the rest will follow. As an example, Redwood National and State Parks is just north of Eureka, is home of the world's tallest trees. It is a World Heritage Site and one of the most inspiringly beautiful places on the globe. It is also one of the least visited national parks in the national park system. It's worth noting that the park's visitor center is built away from the woods in a tsunami zone. Most of the people drive right past it and don't even know they're crossing into a national park. And when they do stop at the visitor center, they have to get back in their cars to drive up and see a redwood tree. The national park wants to relocate and rebuild that visitor center as a catalyst for inspiring excellent visitor experience and a new relevance for the park. This is where Save the Redwoods League comes in. There used to be an old-growth mill on a 125-acre property of flat land right at the junction of Redwood Creek and Prairie Creek at the southern gateway to the national park. All of the giant trees harvested in that landscape were milled on this site. About 10 years ago, when all of the old growth in the area were either cut down or protected, the mill closed and was removed from the site. And 2 years ago, Save the Redwoods League bought it. Again, it's at the confluence of Prairie Creek and Redwood Creek, abutting Highway 101 at the southern entrance of the park, wedged between two spectacular old-growth groves. And we are advancing a vision to pull back the pavement, restore the creeks, meadows, and forest, and design and build a gateway visitor destination for the national park. With partnership from the local community, the National Park Service, California State Parks, and the Yurok Tribe, Save the Redwoods League is leading the design and development process, bringing state-of-the-art education and interpretation, technology, and recreational access. This is an opportunity to set a new bar for how parks can engage young and diverse communities and re-inspire a love of the outdoors. A chance to have our national park attract and welcome a broader diversity of visitors, inspire a new generation of stewards, and be a model for renewed relevance for parks into the next century. So as we plan for our next 100 years, the Redwood Forest once again offers important lessons for a new era of conservation challenges. In a time of climate change, when the global challenge seems almost too huge to do anything about, the Redwoods offer something we can do about it. They remind us of the importance of forest restoration and of the extraordinary carbon capacity that can be restored here in California. In a time of urbanization, when our children are more disconnected from nature than ever, the Redwoods offer a gateway to a lifetime of connection with the outdoors. And at a time when so many of our iconic landscapes have been lost, from the subdivision of the Western Prairie to the damming of the world's waterways, we see in the Redwood Forest a wild landscape of incredible multiple values that grew here for millions of years, that we almost lost, but that we can heal and get started in our lifetime. The more we learn about the Redwoods, the more today's challenges start to seem less daunting, with the vision of a vibrant, healing Redwood Forest connected with a network of world-class parks, inspiring healthy communities, and a renewed love of the outdoors. This is a great moment for conservation, and I am more inspired than ever by the relevance, the opportunity, and the potential impact that we could collectively advance in the Redwood Forest in the decades to come. So in closing, I have a quick homework assignment. I would ask you to go to a Redwood Park and try and bring someone who has never been to a Redwood Park before. And think about the thousands of people that have been there before you and the thousands who will come after. And of all who have had and will have moments of joy and awe at the irrepressible beauty of the world, and who will go home a little bit different or a little stronger or a little happier. And as you think about those moments of joy, accumulating across generations along miles of trails in special places throughout the Redwood Range, consider that to be the truest measure of our shared success and our responsibility moving forward. Thank you.